Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mark Haskellson. I'm the president of Compliancy Group. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're very excited to have Novastore with us today and Nate Farage, who is going to be speaking on the issues of where ransomware and HIPAA kind of smack into each other. So for today's webinar is about that. Both organizations have great education series. So the next one coming up on the Compliancy Group side will be HIPAA 101, the 30-minute guide to understanding compliance. It's Tuesday the 27th, or I'm sorry, June 27th. That one is definitely meant for kind of entry-level folks. So for those of you that have more advanced folks, this is more of an entry-level item for them. If you do want to access any of our Compliancy Group series, you are welcome to grab what is the current webinar, or we have all of our past webinars archived. You are welcome to download them at any time and share them, and we hope that they are educational for you. Novastore also has an education series. They have part 3 of building the correct environment to fight ransomware coming up on June 8th at 2 o'clock. I do hope that you folks will join them as well. We're kind of excited today. This webinar is actually aimed specifically for folks that are the providers in the market. So to the best of our knowledge, there are no end users, but really the resellers, the MSPs, the IT organizations that service them. So we do hope that you will find this information important and valuable. For those of you who are not familiar with GoToWebinar, if you would like to pose questions, and we do hope that you will pose questions to us, please do use on the right-hand side. You should have a little box. There might be a little arrow to open it or close it, but please do post questions. Today we are going to be saving them to the end. There's a lot of content we want to get through, a lot of education we want to share. So please do post questions, and know at the end, both Nate and myself will be available to answer questions, whether they be about ransomware storage or compliance. Okay, let's get going. All right. There will also be one other thing today. We will be doing one polling question. We will try not to, we do hope that you will find it interesting, and often we try to take those polling questions and use them for infographics or other educational purposes. So thank you for answering it today. Now, obviously, the issue of ransomware has become, especially in the last week or two, a very hot topic, and I think there are lots of misunderstandings. Professional, and I think most of us on the security and technical side are pretty familiar with this stuff, or at least knowledgeable of it as much as we can in this fast-moving environment. But most of the time, the end users in the market are confused. They really don't understand what this means. Is it a virus? Is it like, does my virus protection scan for this? So this type of knowledge hopefully will leave you better equipped, so that you can hopefully help your clients and yourself I hope you have not had the unpleasant experience. So flow is going to be, we're going to talk a little bit about compliance, because without understanding HIPAA compliance, you could have the tightest security in the world, and you could have human error bring you down. So we're going to talk about compliance and its role in helping prevent that. Nate is going to spend some time helping you guys understand ransomware, how to combat ransomware, mitigating your risks with backups. Then we'll close up with a little conversation of where we're seeing and why we see healthcare so prominent in regards to what is the challenges in regards to ransomware. And then we'll close up with question and answers. So, okay, first thing, well, there you go, some pictures of Nate and I. Hopefully that makes you smile. I hate these bios, but hey, they do help you get a sense of who we are, and as you ask questions, we'll smile back at you. Okay, so I'm going to start off here for a second of talking about a little bit about what are the odds of an audit, and it's amazing what people will do to avoid or to hopefully benefit from the scenario. So you'll play lotto, but your chances of winning are pretty low. Okay, you won't go swimming because you're afraid of a shark attack. You'll run inside because of lighting. You'll play golf every weekend and pay a ton of money for a coach. And then what we start seeing is often what we heard in the market was, I'm really not that worried about HIPAA because they're never going to audit me. Well, in today's world, with what is random audits, meaningful use audits, and breach-related audits, the chance of the question is no longer in healthcare. And by the way, for those of you that are service providers, understand if you have a single healthcare client, remember you got to be HIPAA compliant. So these numbers absolutely apply to you. So the question is not whether or when, if you will get audited. The question is when you will get audited. Okay. Now, the last thing is a ransomware attack. Same thing. Most people think that the chances of it actually happening are pretty low. But in reality, in today's world, and I know across our client base, we hear about a ransomware attack pretty much every week. Okay. There is not a week that goes by where we do not find out a client that has had a problem. Okay. So let's talk a little bit. Let's take a poll for a second. So let me just launch this one. And if you guys would be kind enough to answer this, have you been affected by ransomware? Yes, one of my clients have been affected. I've had an attack or no attack, but my clients are asking me for support. So appreciate take your chance, fill that out. Take a look at the results in a minute. All right, we'll give you the last couple of stragglers a chance to get in there and answer. Okay, so I'm going to close it out and let's share the results. So it's interesting. 67% of you said one of your clients has been affected. 7% of you have been, your organization has directly been affected, and 27% of you are hearing your clients ask for this. And this is pretty common what we're seeing. And Nate, I don't know if you have any commentary on what you're seeing with your client base. These pretty much the numbers you.
Oh, I mean, we see all sorts of, we see the end result of it. Let's put it that way. That we get so many people calling our support lines asking, hey, all my stuff is encrypted. How do I restore this stuff? Can you help me, walk me through it, that type of thing. And we're seeing that both on the end user stuff and on the service provider side. I mean, we had one service provider up in Canada. One client got hit back-to-back weeks, and it was just, it's crazy how predominant it is right now.
Yeah, no, we see it as well. All right, so let's get back to the webinar. Okay, so let me start off with compliance. By the way, guys, this is not going to be a boring 164-3B. I'm going to hit the highlight, and those of you that are already clients of Compliancy Group, sorry guys, but for those, this is for the folks that have not. So what happens is, HIPAA's been around a long time. Okay, and most people misunderstand, including, by the way, a lot. I'm on several CompTIA boards, which are certifying security techs. You'd be amazed how many people still fundamentally understand what HIPAA is. Okay, so the key misunderstandings are what I want to talk about. Okay, the first one being compliance versus security. Okay, now many of the folks on this call are security experts, so you guys get this. And there is no doubt that you guys would be able to would definitely understand that compliance or HIPAA compliance is the absolute minimal level of standards from a security perspective. It was really built, the law was not about security by the definition of we as technology players think, but really about the concept of the supervision of the data that you work with, the information. Let's not even use the word data. The information that a doctor would work with or a medical facility would work with. So it is, the best way that I've found to explain it is, you can still have a horrible breach or incident. And as long as you can prove that you had an effective compliance program, okay, that you did what was the things that were required under the law, you don't get fined. Okay, your patients may still sue you. There's a lot of things that can happen. Okay, but there's no fine or breach in that scenario. Okay, or what we considered neglect or willful neglect or gross negligence. And compliance, or especially HIPAA compliance, is really, it's a binary scenario. You can either prove that you did it or you can't. Okay, so documentation, methodology, process becomes very important. Okay, like I said, if you do it wrong, if you do it right, you don't get fined. You can still have a breach. Like I said, it's not the same as the, this is not the security by definition that let's say the IT community works around. Now, security, these two silos do intersect a tremendous amount. Okay, and it is critical, and our advice to every client we've ever spoken to, client or prospect, is that you need to be doing both. You need to be working with people like us, and you need to be working with people like Novastore and the folks on this call. Okay, because security from an IT perspective, penetration tests, security risk analysis, vulnerability scans, virus protection, the idea of the house in the cloud, and all of those things are risk related. Okay, you guys know that nobody is entirely bulletproof. It's only a matter of time and money before someone, if they wanted to hack you, really could get in. Okay. Now, let's talk about the next big set of and on the privacy versus security, when your client asks you for a security risk assessment for HIPAA purposes, this is where the big misunderstanding occurs, and this is what I'm going to show you on this slide. Whether you are a doctor's office or the folks on this call, if you have a single healthcare client, this all applies to you, okay? The privacy rule, HIPAA is made up of 3 rules. The privacy rule has to do with the communication with patients. So it does not apply, sorry, I'm going to back up here, it does not apply to you as a business associate, but you do have a responsibility as a BA to support your client, your end client, your covered entity, your doctor's office, in their satisfaction of the privacy rule. And an example would be, there's a problem, for some reason you were doing remote monitoring, you saw something, HIPAA-related information. If the patient ultimately asked, who saw my record, your organization would be responsible to say, yes, my tech, while doing a service event in this scenario, did see the following things. We were not using it for anything other than we were trying to resolve a technical issue. Okay, now, where most people get sideways is the security rule. Okay, some of this is nomenclature driven, and that the security rule really is made up of 3 assessments or audits. Okay, what is considered security or technical audit as more similar to what, from an IT perspective as security, okay, is great. It is most common misunderstood by your client's perspective is that they think they need a security risk assessment for meaningful use. You may hear MACRA, MIPS, there's many different terms for it. But what those are all incentive programs, okay? If you were HIPAA compliant and done everything that was required for HIPAA compliance, you would have already had the required security risk assessment. Now, where most people fail, and I've seen many of wonderful security IT firms that I work with make this mistake, is you got to do the rest, okay? And if you look at all the fines that have been levied, okay, there's always 3 reasons. One of them is always incomplete risk assessments. You did a security audit. There was a $2.7 million fine to an Oregon medical center. It wasn't for the lost laptop. It was because the response back about the lost laptop was you did a security risk assessment, in this case 6 of them, and you were proud of your cloud hosting. Your hosting provider was HIPAA compliant, but you were not. Why? Because you didn't do the rest of the required audits. So what are those? A physical audit. That is a walking around. Are there areas in a location that where HIPAA-related information, PHI, protected health or personal health information, could be exposed? That's a file cabinet in a hallway. Okay, that is people throwing documentation that should have been shredded, for example, in a secure box, in a box under their desk. They'll drop it off at the end of the day. Okay, the last audit is the administrative audits. Okay, now the reason why the administrative audits really, and especially when we start talking about ransomware and the risks, is if your staff doesn't know that they should not open an email. Okay, if there is not a policy or procedure that is clearly, and that everyone on your staff knows that they are not supposed to do this, they will inadvertently make the mistake of opening the email. The Minnesota Medical Group was a $1.5 million fine. Maintenance person, working the night shift, checked his email, his personal email. Unfortunately, they didn't have the right protection in place, and it brought in a malware, which ultimately they were fined for what is negligence, not having done the assessment and not having policies and procedures in place to protect it. Same thing with that 2.7 Oregon. The fine was not for the lost laptop. The fine was, why was the laptop on vacation in a child's hands? Okay, there should have been a policy or procedure that said you cannot do that. When you go on vacation, you can't take company equipment. If you do, it must be kept in a secure fashion. So these are the misunderstandings that we see people doing. The last thing is the breach notification rule. Yes, this does apply to you as well, which means by law, any incident or breach that occurs, small or large, must be investigated. And then once it's investigated, there's only 2 paths. A meaningful breach, which means more than 500 people were potentially affected. You must report within 60 days. First fine of 2017, $475,000 fine, was for an organization that they didn't even lose anything horrible. It was a surgical schedule. But because it was found later and they had never reported it, it was found by another group, ultimately they were considered negligent. Okay. By the way, for those of you for non-meaningful breaches, you must report them at the end of the year, 60 days from the end of the year. So by March 1st, you got to report them. By the way, for those of you who also don't think this doesn't apply to you, last year was the first year an IT firm was fined. In this case, $650,000. They were a Catholic charities group out of Philly. They had unfortunately had a situation where a tech was doing some work. He put something on his personal cell phone. In this case, it was an iPhone. The iPhone was lost. That was considered grossly negligent. Okay, so let's keep moving. So business now. What is this all comes out of the Omnibus Rule. 5 years ago, most people really didn't care about HIPAA compliance, or maybe did not care about it anywhere near as much. It is really the Omnibus Rule that changed all this. The Omnibus Rule that went into effect or enforcement in September of 2013 says that most of the folks that are on this call with us today, even though you are not doctors, you have most likely, and the stats we see is about 25, that most of you, about 25% of your clients are in healthcare. Remember, that can be a doctor's office, or could be a lawyer or an accountant, an answering service, shredding service that services the doctors. Okay, so in that case, it is not whether or not your client asks you to sign a business associate agreement. Okay, if you have one healthcare client, you by law must be HIPAA compliant. Okay, if you want to know all the details of what's required there, please do jump on one of our educational sessions, and we'll help educate about that. Okay, but it is liability by function. Okay, you are liable for the violations. Okay, so this isn't, well, it's my doctor's problem, or let's say my client's problem. Okay, and you are responsible for what is the security rule and the breach notification rule, the privacy rule, the support you give to your client in answering their questions. Now, two things I'm going to talk about that are really important about this. Understand, your clients are not allowed by law to do business with you unless you have a BA agreement in place and they have done what is some sort of technical due diligence that you can protect the information that you are interacting with. Okay, so understand, you may not care that much, but the client, smallest fine I've seen, and every single fine that was levied in 2016, all $24 million in fines, every single one had failure to have BA agreement in place. Okay, at least one. Okay, so understand, it is a high risk for your clients, and you do not want to be in that situation. Also understand that, for example, the new HHS administration, a gentleman by the name of Tom Price, he was very vocal but last week and the week before that he is now, his belief in the way to enforce HIPAA is by going after the providers. Okay, no longer is he, not that he's not going after doctors' offices, but he feels very strongly that it is the solution providers in the healthcare market, that by fixing one provider, they fix potentially hundreds of doctors, versus if they catch one doctor, etc. Now, by the way, remember, or if you were not aware, if you have a client fails an audit, they will then audit you. That is what's part of what's called the Phase 2 protocols. Okay. Now, so in the end, you really do want to be worrying about this. It is a strong differentiator for you. So what happens? Here's what we normally see. Okay. People will have, they'll do a security risk assessment, but fail to do the rest. They'll have policies, procedures, and training, but miss the rest of what's required under the law. Okay, and I'm going to give you a real-world example in the next slide of where this exact enforcement cost an organization $150,000. Okay, most of the time what we see is that often the folks we see in the market are addressing pieces of compliance well. That's fantastic. You're making a good faith effort, but understand, if you are not doing all of it, because remember that first slide, compliance versus security, you are unfortunately vulnerable, okay, or your clients are vulnerable. Okay, so you really do want to be paying attention to this. I've heard some people say, for example, we don't have to worry about this. Trump, as the new administration, is anti-regulation. Well, that was good until yesterday when he announced the cuts at HHS, of which there were substantive cuts. He mentioned a whole bunch of programs that he got rid of because he believes they are not proven effective, except for one, enforcement. He said currently HHS is getting $5 back for every $1 in enforcement effort. So this is not going away. The pressure is on both you and your clients. Okay, so just to give you a sense, 400% increase from 15 to 16, and this year they have almost, it's at 17.8 in fines. There has almost been as much fines this year as all of last year. Okay, so please do not blow this off. Okay, Avoidable Breach, I told you to give you an example. This was a relatively small organization, nonprofit mental health group out of Alaska. They had a minor malware issue. More than 500 people were affected. They had to report it. By the way, when you report a breach, it is a mandatory audit, okay? And in that mandatory audit, 3 things were identified, okay? They had done a security risk assessment, but failed to do the rest of the audits. 2, they had a purchased manual. They had policies and procedures. They did have them, but it was a purchased manual, and they had clearly not modified them to make sure that they accurately reflected the way the practice ran, okay? There are requirements as far as document and version control that you have to prove you reviewed them every year, and they could clearly not prove that. The last thing was ineffective training. And I use these particular 3 examples because you'd be amazed how many people tell me we did our audits, we got policies, procedures, training, we're set. Well, in this case, $150,000 later in a corrective action plan, not so good. The reason why the training issue was contested was they had a very, very high turnover rate. In this case, about 30%, 40% in a given year. And because they are an external group that did training once a year, the government said, clearly then, there is a percentage of your staff, and a relatively large percentage of your staff, that has not had any type of HIPAA training, okay? So understand this is not just your frontline techs. Everybody in the organization have to attest to your policies, procedures, and training on an annual basis every year, okay? So to reiterate, you really got to make sure you're doing all the audits, you and your clients. It's a great opportunity for you guys to differentiate yourself. They have to be updated, and your training has to have what's considered an effective training program. Okay? So now I'm going to pass this off to Nate, who's going to help you guys understand a little bit more about ransomware. Nate, take it away.
Yep, thanks a lot, Mark. Yeah, so I'm just going to give you a very high-level look on ransomware and some of the attack vectors and how it can spread. Just one second. It looks like Mark. Looks like you need to pass over control if you wouldn't mind. There we go. So before we go into too in depth, let's talk about what ransomware is. The basic definition of it is it's a piece of software that disallows access to your files, folders, computer infrastructure, what have you. And while it's holding that infrastructure or data hostage, they're asking you for money. Pay me 2 bitcoins, which is a couple $100 or $1,000 to some random hacker in Russia or what have you. This has become huge business for organizations that hire these hackers and the hackers themselves, because a lot of people are actually paying this money to them. That's kind of where the whole sorry about that. That's where the whole WannaCry kind of came into the forefront here in the last couple of weeks. WannaCry took a little bit different vector than a lot of the other ransomware that has been in the past press in the last couple of years. It took an exploit that might have leaked from some other locations, government-wise, but it was one of those things where it came through the SMB protocol, obviously, as a lot of people have probably heard or read, instead of going over the normal email or malware site or going on some website or some attachment. It's a lot of the spread came just straight through having the SMB port open on your firewall and unpatched machines. A lot of people conjectured that it was a lot of old unpatched Windows XP 2003 or other boxes out there, but a little bit of it's been about 2 weeks since this has started, affecting 220,000 people, 1,000 systems, and it seems like the majority of the infected systems actually are Windows 7 machines. They say about 98% of all the WannaCry victims are actually using Windows 7. So it was quite interesting seeing that it wasn't some of these older machines that a lot of people were saying that this is probably what the issue is, but it's these Windows 7 machines that weren't being properly patched in most cases. Primary types of ransomware. So we see 2 primary types. most often right now, the crypto type ransomware and the locker ransomware. The crypto, obviously it's encrypting the actual data itself, making it so you can't get access to whatever data that is on your local machine, your shares, what have you. Anything that it was able to catch and encrypt, it's holding for ransom. Whereas the locker ransomware has been a little bit less prevalent lately, and it's that type of ransomware is locking the entire machine itself instead of just the actual data. Let's see. Some of the attack vectors or ransomware targets that we're seeing in general, the biggest one is the social and phishing type entry point. The social aspect. It relies on the human factor. Patching the human factor is very, very, very hard to do. It's all about education. Making sure that they know what to look for and ask questions. To providers, to administrators, what have you. There's no software that can really help against that. It's just all education. The other thing that we see major points on is reuse of passwords and configurations, such as any of these big sites that have gotten hacked in the last couple of years, such as like the Yahoo dump and that type of thing, where so many passwords from so many different people were gathered in these large exploits, and people have a tendency to reuse those passwords. So these guys are coming in from any other vector that they can see, getting into emails like webmail, that type of thing, that might have been using the same password that they might have got from some other exploit of some other random website out there. And then with the WannaCry attack, the malware flash kind of 0-day type solution that they were using to access the majority of the systems out there. We're seeing some, especially with WannaCry, there was a lot that got hit with that one, but I would say the majority of what we see here, at least at Novastore, customers trying to recover from, is actually the social and phishing sites attacks that they're actually trying to recover from. Just very high level of how some of these ransomware attacks generally work. The ransomware is introduced to the user system, whether it's via email, website, or some sort of exploit. It gets installed in the system. It connects to the command and control center that the hackers are running, and then it sends and receives, updates possibly. Hey, some of these the more sophisticated ransomware out there grabs a new copy of the executable to do the encryption in order to get around whatever antivirus or anti-malware that's out there, or even to change how it's acting to better infiltrate the system, that type of thing. Then the files are encrypted after it's downloaded and all that stuff, and then the ransomware demand is displayed to grab the data, and then the countdown begins. Typically, we're seeing maybe 2-3 days on the ransomware, which can be really, really devastating if you have long weekends like Memorial Weekend. What happens if they get encrypted on the end of Friday and they don't notice it until Tuesday? All their countdown's already done, so the only choice that they actually have is to recover from that. They don't even have the choice of going and paying the ransom itself. Just a couple high-level things on how to combat ransomware. We created this checklist that you can get at the end of this webinar that kind of goes in depth on some questions on how to properly protect your clients and yourself. It's a good checklist to go over. Some of the things that we're seeing that community-driven type checklists that help make sure that you have proper protection against some of these breaches. One of the biggest things, like Mark was telling you about, is education. Education itself, what not to click on. I mean, even here at Novastore, we're attacked quite often, but all of our guys, know what to look for, know what to not open, and if anything suspicious comes in, even our CEO and such, they send it to one of the techs, say, hey, is this an okay machine, okay email, that type of thing to work with. So education is a huge in trying to mitigate the actual spread or installation of malware. And even if it does come in, being able to quarantine and halt the prevention of the spread, making sure that you have an action plan in place in order to stop the spread of whatever malware it is, making sure that correct permissions are set across the infrastructure. So, Susie, the dental secretary, doesn't have full access to all of the data, that encrypts all the data, or what have you. Making sure that the access is, restricted correctly to how it should be. And obviously making sure that if you do get hit, that you know how to recover, how to recover your client systems, have a plan set into effect, so that when it does happen, that you can mitigate that the damage, the downtime there. Like I said with the previous slide, we want to make sure that you know what to do, set up a prevention plan, making sure that that you have a good layered approach. Putting in restrictions for the user privileges to make sure that everything isn't all open, so that you can, so that if something does get in, that it just affects what that one person has access to and not the entire company, depending on what access that user should have. And one of the hardest things, especially in the MSP world, to get across is the access permissions with dealing with local permissions. So a lot of the people are probably used to having local admin access instead of the limited user accounts that a lot of service providers want to put into place. This is one of the hardest things to usually get in, especially if an IT firm hasn't been ensuring this. But it's a great policy in order to help prevent the spread and actual installation of some of these malwares that we're seeing. Making sure that you have current, up-to-date malware and antivirus, solutions. Making sure that it's a not a consumer, version, or making sure it's an actual, business-grade anti-malware, antivirus software. Making sure that you have all the updates for, Windows, your firewall, any of the normal exploit endpoints that we're seeing. And then, as much as you can, filtering out spam, attachments. Making sure that if you do educate the clients on, what extensions are good and not good, making sure that a PDF that might have a hidden exe extension on it that might be a executable instead of a PDF, that somehow got through whatever filtering you might have, is they can actually see, hey, this actually is an exe, not a PDF. And then making sure that you have a good foolproof backup plan that you have actually written down, you have tested the recovery, and you know what to do if something does happen. And speaking of the backup plan and recovery, just a little bit of how to mitigate your actual risk that you might have with backup. Setting up an actual dedicated backup software with professional services with us. Whether or not it's Novastore, whether or not it's Acronis, or whoever you're using for backup solutions, making sure that you know how to set it up correctly, making sure that you're scheduling regular and file and system image backups, encrypting the data at rest. This was something that Mark actually pointed out to me, that I actually didn't know going into this webinar that if you get hit by ransomware and the actual data is encrypted at rest, you don't actually have to, what is it? You don't have to declare that you...
What happens is, let me jump in. What happens is, as long as you can prove that you had everything encrypted, which means the thief can't use it either, obviously you can't use it because it's ransomware, but as long as they can't access it either, then it is not considered a HIPAA breach. Okay, it's still, all the security issues are still there, but it is not a breach that will require you to report it to the federal government. So, thanks.
Right. So basically making sure that the actual data at rest on your local machines, along with the backup, are encrypted. Make sure that you don't have to report it as a breach. Yeah, that's something I didn't know going into this while talking with Mark. Testing your system and recovery process for practical. How fast can you actually do that recovery? What are you going to lose? If you're doing a monthly image backup, weekly file backup, and daily incremental backups, how fast can you recover from that? What happens if that entire machine blows up? Are you able to recover in time? Is the client good with being out of data, or do they need to do backups, more frequently than just once a day? Is it incrementally, every half hour during the day that they need to be done? Depending on what they deem as an acceptable loss is kind of where you need to go with how much money and how much preparation you need to deal with specifically with the backup. And one of the other things that we see, especially with the latest versions of some of these ransomware softwares, is they're actually searching out and destroying or deleting backups that might be out there. So if that ransomware machine, the machine that gets infected with ransomware, has access to, say, the NAS device that you're backing up to, because either the share is open or it's a common or the user password is stored in the credential manager of that Windows machine, and it can access that share, it's going to go out and delete that backup. Making sure that you have a good solution that has correct, what I'm going to call correct NAS accessibility, so you can actually put just the username and password within the software itself to access that NAS, along with making sure that you actually do have a offsite or disconnected backup. Using the 3-2-1 rule within backup is very essential with some of these newer, more complicated ransomware attacks that we're seeing. Speaking of the 3-2-1 rule, a lot of people talk about the 3-2-1 rule, but not a lot of people know what it actually means. Having 3 copies of your data, 2 different formats and at least 1 offsite. The 3 copies of the data is, making sure, your original data that's on your local machine, that's 1 copy of the data. Another copy of the data is your initial backup, maybe to a NAS, USB drive, what have you, and then at least 1 offsite. Making sure that you have something that isn't in that same building, but obviously with HIPAA, making sure it's, HIPAA protected, HIPAA compliant, whether or not it's in a safe somewhere or in some cloud that's secure, that type of thing. A little bit about backup strategy. Making sure you know what you need to back up. I mean, do you need to back up the entire machine on all machines, or do you need to just back up, just like the database and some files off of one machine? Especially with the virtual machines being a lot more prevalent, a lot of the machine image type backup stuff is kind of, it makes the machine a lot more disposable. So you can recover that VM to another Hyper-V machine with no problem, but you really don't care about the actual physical hardware. You care about the VM itself, or you just care about one specific file, folder, or database on that particular machine. How often must it be backed up and restored? In some cases, depending on what you're actually backing up, you might want to back it up more often, or change how often you test the restore. Give you an example, here at NovaStore, I have there's a SQL server that is very, very central to NovaStore's operation. So that's backed up multiple times a day, and then I also do a scheduled restore of that entire database to another machine daily. Just to make sure that, hey, the backup is good, I can restore it, and actually run some tests against it every day, because it's that important for NovaStore's operation. The same thing that can happen in large hospitals, or even dentists or what have you. Also knowing how long that restore will take, or how much time you'll have to do that restore. Is your client able to be down for 2 days, or is half a day the maximum amount they're allowed to be down, because they're going to be losing that much money? Who will have access to that actual backup, and who will be able to do that recovery? Making sure that you have that documented, and making sure that it is something that is accessible in case of, let's say a fire or something else that happens. But especially with ransomware, if you have that documented on a PDF or Word doc file that's on that machine, and you can't read that document because it's encrypted, you're going to have an issue. So making sure that you actually have a physical copy of your backup and recovery plan actually helps quite a bit. And some of the times it's not even reasonable to do a full restore of something. Maybe it's a large, couple terabyte, 10 terabyte file server. It's not really worth making sure that you can restore all of it all the time, but doing spot checks on that restore, making sure that, hey, weekly I recover a couple folders, files, or what have you out of that backup, just to make sure that the backup is good and the recovery can happen. Kind of going alongside with the solution itself, when you're choosing what type of backup solution, whether it be hardware or software, you kind of need to figure out whether or not is the pricing simple enough that it's predictable for both you and your clients. Do you have a bunch of licensing hoops that you have to worry about? Basically writing down what you need in a backup solution, hardware and software, that'll make both you and your client's life easier. Can you monitor it centrally? Do they have set up a system that's available? Can you call them? I mean, where is the support located? Is it in the same time zone? Is it across the sea? Or can you even call them? Or is email only the option that they have, or chat, or what have you? We've seen a lot of different backup vendors come up in the last couple of years, and some of them, you just kind of have to be careful about what they actually are providing compared to what your expectations are. And then I think we're back to Mark on kind of talking about how ransomware and healthcare is kind of coming into play.
Great, thank you, Nate. Okay, so one of the things that's going on, and obviously we've seen a large rise in what is the attacks, the frequency, the intensity. We're noticing, I can speak across our client base, that where a year ago was predominantly large organizations, now we're seeing small, single, standalone solo practitioners suffering from ransomware attacks. I was at one security conference, and one of the there's now ransomware for kind of hire. You can actually, it's like software as a service. You can actually set it up and basically go after somebody. So it's definitely on the rise. Now, one of the reasons why HIPAA, healthcare, and all of these things kind of got together is for lots of different reasons, healthcare is a very, let's say, fat target. Okay, not just because of the quantity of organizations in the United States, but specifically the information that is contained in healthcare is considered, depending on which statistics you see, but let's say the value of stolen credit card information or stolen banking information, healthcare is worth often 5 times that. Okay, so you'll see a stolen credit card might be worth on the black market might be worth $200. A stolen, being able to steal, or in this case, obviously, ransomware has its different issues, but the healthcare is often worth 5 times that, or $1,000. The other thing you also see in healthcare is the data sits. They will steal healthcare data and sit on it for years before they recreate the identity of that person. Now, in regards to kind of what you can be doing, all right, two quotes, right? One of them is the Department of Justice put out a press release yesterday saying that the first line of defense, and often one of the only line of defenses against ransomware, is the policies and procedures and training of your staff. Okay, in other words, educate them. Make sure they understand, the organization has a policy against this is often maybe the only way some of these organizations are going to be able to effectively prevent this from happening. By the way, that's HIPAA, that's compliance. That's why these two things fit so together. The other quote that I found really interesting is the guy, the real Abagnale. If you remember the movie Catch Me If You Can, Leonardo DiCaprio played the guy who did fraud checks, and that guy ultimately, after he served his jail time, became an FBI and ultimately a security expert. And what he said at a conference I thought was perfect. Okay, and he said every single technology breach, okay, either happens for one of two reasons. You either did not have a policy and procedure in your organization, or you failed to enforce it. And if you think about it, it really does make sense, right? You could have done everything the right way, right? You could have had great backup, great encryption, and if you had somebody who didn't understand that why it was wrong to open an email, why it was important not to use the same password over and over again, not to write it on the back of on post-notes on the back of computers, unfortunately, this is where most incidents is. That's what causes them, human error. Okay, so other examples of real-world examples, University of Washington. Okay, they had a simple, straightforward malware situation. Somebody downloaded an email attachment. Okay, and why they were fined $750,000 was not for the malware, obviously, but because the organization should have known better. Okay, and this particular example was the one I used earlier. This was a night maintenance guy. Okay, and what happened was the computer he accessed was in their maintenance shed, right? And because it was in the maintenance shed, no one had bothered to ever look at it. Okay, the IT and security teams just they forgot, right? They just didn't take the time to look at all the possible entry points. So that is why it was considered negligence or gross negligence in this case, and why they were fined so heavily. So this is the plea that we give you today, and hopefully this was valuable in helping you understand where HIPAA, ransomware, what's going on, the benefits of backup. The importance of having, like for example, Novastar shared the 3-2-1 rule. This is how you can protect your firm and then ultimately protect your clients. Now, obviously, I think most of the folks here have two reasons for being on this call. One, protect your own firms, but really the other thing is your clients need support, right? And this is a great way for you to add additional revenue streams, both the opportunities with Novastar in backup, and in the case of HIPAA compliance, making sure these people really have everything in place. It's the right thing to do. Okay, so a couple of different things, and Nate, if you want to jump in and talk a little about the ransomware checklist you have.
Yeah, the ransomware checklist is kind of like a high-level overview of, hey, you should make sure that when's the last time you've checked your backup, scheduled the restore, along with checking the antivirus, and some other tips and tricks that I've gleaned over the last couple of years about what people are talking about on how to prevent malware even getting into the system itself.
Okay. On our side, we also there's a couple of different resources we have on the site. This one is going to link you specifically to our HIPAA compliance checklist. Great tool, by the way. This is for you guys to look at yourself, okay, or for your clients to look at themselves. You don't have to send anything back to us. We're not going to use this to let you know how bad or good you are. But it is surprising how often people, when they take a look and see the things that are required, that they're like, wow, either one, you're doing it right, or two, you have a vulnerability. So these are resources that are available from both firms. I certainly hope you will take us up on it. Okay, so now I believe we're going to get to questions. So please, I have a list of a couple questions that have already come in, but please do start sending them over. We look forward to answering them for you. Okay, so, well, one question is kind of a straightforward one to you, Nate. The part 1 and 2 series of your NovaStore series, one of the people would like to know if that's still available to them.
Yeah, the webinar, the previous webinar should be available on our website, and yeah, we can send you an email out with a download link for that webinar.
Great. Couple of questions. I'm just catching up on a lot here about this webinar and other tools. I know I can speak from the Compliancy Group side. All of our webinars are archived and are available, so you can go to them or you can download them and share them with your clients. There's also a set of resources. There's a bunch of resource tools that we have that you're welcome to download. I'm sure, Nate, is there information on your site?
Oh yeah, I mean all the webinars are up there, along with a lot of different white papers and some blog articles specifically on ransomware and a bunch of other different things that we've seen. I mean, even how to use some of the Microsoft technologies correctly to ease some of the pains that you've seen with backup.
All right, so now we're beginning to get into some real questions that I think will be hopefully more valuable to the folks. So the question posed was, how do you avoid the whole victim shaming stigma when explaining the reasons for a previous leak, exploit, or failure?
That's a good one. You want me to take that one, or you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll let you. I mean, well, I can speak to it on the HIPAA side, but I think that's more. It sounds. So you know, it's funny. I've never had a question asked quite that way. So what I can tell you in regards to HIPAA, the reporting of an incident or breach has some very strict laws about anonymity. So technically, an organization by law is supposed to allow their employees, their patients, etc., the ability to report something like this anonymously. Okay, so in some ways, at least from a HIPAA law perspective, there was provisions about protecting what is considered a whistleblower. Okay, and that's the official term for it. That do. Now, what I've seen across some of our clients is, hey, listen, this is not it wasn't you were bad, you did something wrong. Ideally, what you would like to think, going back to policies and procedures, often it was somebody, let's say, it might not have been trained correctly, so more training. But as far as I would like to think that most organizations would not intentionally embarrass their staff, especially, although I don't have any national statistics, but I have a feeling in many ways it is the executive staff of most firms that are probably the least, or let's say the most non-compliant, and are often the highest risk individuals. I mean, I've physically been in contact where I have seen senior management, compliance, security, risk officers giving me a tour of their facilities when I noticed they had the passwords on the back of their badge. Okay, I've seen heads of medical departments put up a thank you letter in a common lunchroom about a patient who was saying, thank you, when I was in there for my following procedure, you got, your staff was so kind. Understand that's a HIPAA violation, folks. So, hopefully your senior management staff is smart enough not to embarrass themselves. Okay, so now next question is, and I think this one is more to you, Nate, is can ransomware encrypt already encrypted data?
Yes, absolutely can. Yeah, I mean, if the machine, if the user that has that opened the ransomware, or whatever permissions the ransomware has that comes in, if it can access that data, it can encrypt it. It doesn't care if it's encrypted already. So just encrypting data doesn't protect that data.
Yeah, by the way, while you were speaking, I did forward out to everybody the link to NovaStore for the checklist and some of the other content. So do look on your screen. You should have had that posted to you. Okay, so let's go to next question. So if I am using an offsite backup location, do I need a business associate agreement with the service provider with the off-site company. So I guess that's me. Okay, so whether it is
from my understanding, yes, you do. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So whether it is the covered entity, that's a doctor's office outsourcing to you, or you outsourcing to part of your services to somebody else, yes, you are obligated. It's really the technical term is called a subcontractor relationship, but you as the BA are responsible for managing your own business associates. Okay, so yes, you are absolutely responsible for that. It's a big deal because a lot of times the whole concept of a business associate agreement, and this comes up a lot. Okay, it's actually another question that I see here. What a good business associate agreement says is some very straightforward things. It can say lots, but should say at a minimum. We both understand we fall under HIPAA as a law. Okay, we both understand we need to be HIPAA compliant. 2, I am responsible for what I do, and you're responsible for what you do. And often I see vendors afraid to sign BA agreements because their fear that this increases their liability. It is actually the exact opposite, because what it does is it defines a very clear line in between what your responsibilities are and what your client's responsibilities are. And actually, in many cases, it is your best and only protection in the case of a massive breach. Okay, and that the government, when they come in, if they see clearly this was where the line was drawn, they'll investigate that organization. Okay, now the only thing that's kind of just as an FYI, remember in today's world, if your client gets audited, the government reserves the right to audit all of its business associates or vendors, and vice versa. If you as a BA fail a HIPAA audit, the government has the right to audit all of your healthcare clients. Okay, so you do want to make sure you have these protections in place. Okay, let's see. Can you touch on prevention of the MITM at healthcare Wi-Fi networks?
That sounds like man in the middle. Is that?
Yeah, I'm assuming. Yeah, they're using the acronym. So.
Yeah, man in the middle. I don't have a whole lot of information on that. Is there anything from your side that you have on that, Mark?
Do I have anything specifically on that? But someone had asked to see the contact information, so that's both the contact information for both Nate and myself. Do we have any prevention? It's not one that I have any good data on. So I would, if you want, what we can do is for the person who asked the question, we'll let us get a good answer for you, and we'll send it back to you. Okay, it's our pleasure. I'm sorry that it was funny. Normally, I start off a webinar saying whoever can stump one of us, wins a special prize. So I apologize I didn't do that this time. So you're the winner for having asked the question that you got both of us saying. I'm not exactly 100% sure how to answer that question. Okay, let's see. Okay. Yes, it was. I think so. The further clarification was on the man in the middle as a potential entry point for ransomware. Does that help at all? And you answer that question there?
I mean, basically, if there's an exploit available in the access point that you're using, or if they're doing a man in the middle attack through putting a rogue access point in and doing it that way, that's pretty hard to kind of catch. I've not actually ran into it, so I don't have anything immediately that I could answer on that. But no, that's a good attack vector. Let me put it that way, especially when you're talking physical devices there.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay, so we're coming up on the hour, but let me get one or two more questions in. Do I still need to keep data off-site if I have the data in a fireproof safe at the office?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're talking about the 3-2-1 rule, you absolutely do, because I mean, what happens if a tornado comes in or someone steals the safe itself? I mean, then you have no, I don't care, how bomb-proof that USB drive or NAS is. If you only have one copy of it and it's on site, you're not covered, in my book.
Yeah. Yep, and to add a little more color to that, often I speak to people and they talk about, let's say, disaster recovery, and I say, well, you really need to be thinking about business continuity. So what if there was just a snowstorm, okay, and you're in Michigan and you can't get to that copy. Okay, so there is great benefit in having well, obviously it's dangerous if the building burnt down and etc. But think of it as, hey, if I really had to recover my organization, I probably wouldn't be doing it in my building, right? There's a chance I might the whole building may have been compromised. So they're definitely you definitely want to keep that. I like the 3-2-1 rule that you shared, Nate. I think it was a great thing. Okay, let me grab one more question. Let's see, and it was, how often should I revisit my ransomware protection action plan?
Well, personally here at Novastore, we do it probably once a quarter or so, just to kind of keep up on things and because there's always new things coming up. But I don't know if there's a hard and fast rule on it, but once a year is almost not enough. Let's put it that way in my book.
Well, especially how quickly the risks have been changing. From a HIPAA language perspective, the law requires an annual review of all policies and procedures in regards to this. So at least that's the legal answer. So, all right, folks, we really, Nate, I really appreciate you being kind enough to spend some time talking with us. For the folks that joined us, you guys are fantastic. We really appreciate. For those of you that are already resellers of the respective products, we thank you very much for your trust in working with us and letting us help you and your clients. For the folks that are not working with us, we would love to, I know on our side, we would love to give you a demo of how our solution works. It is a great tool for you to add compliance as a service to your offering. That's a great way to make extra money, and I'm sure, Nate, you probably have I don't know if you want to talk about your partner relationships and how these folks might be able to participate.
Yeah, I mean, just get in contact with us. I mean, and we offer free backup consultations. Just give us a ring and we can set up an appointment. We'll go through and see what you guys currently have set up with your backup and recovery plans, and give you even some suggestions, even if you're not using our software. I mean, Novastore has great backup software, but in some cases it doesn't fit in some cases. So we're very familiar with other types of solutions out there, and can give general guidelines too, even if we're not very familiar with specific products that you may or may not be using.
All right, once again, everybody, I thank you so much for spending time with us today. I'm sure you can all get back to your busy lives. Nate and Novastore, thank you so much for helping us out. We greatly appreciate it. Folks, please make sure you catch up on both of our education series. We work hard to hopefully keep you guys on the leading edge of what we see in the market. So have a great day. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.